As I was saying, Mr. Chairman, today we're going to unlock the policies to make America safe and prosperous again. This fiscal framework will guide the process for restoring the fiscal health of our nation by reining in reckless spending and reigniting economic growth. In addition, and importantly, it provides critical resources to our Commander-in-Chief to secure our borders, strengthen our military, and provide for the common defense. But for the next 2 hours, Mr. Chairman, my Democrat colleagues are going to reach way back to the only plays they know how to run, making false claims and fear-mongering. Why? Because they are still, even after the recent election, disconnected from the people's reality, because they're more concerned with protecting unionized government bureaucrats and woke and wasteful government programs than they are about protecting taxpayers and their sacred treasure. Why? Because their commitment isn't to we the people in this fateful moment. It's to we the government and to derailing the mandate from the people for common sense policies and President Trump's America First agenda. I'm going to take some time to set the record straight, Mr. Chairman, so that every time the American people hear these false claims, to mislead them into thinking that the tax cuts somehow benefited the billionaires and corporations and that Republicans are cutting benefits for seniors and the poorest among us. I want the American people to know the truth. And here's the truth. The Trump tax cuts lowered tax rates for every American household at every income level while increasing the amount of taxes paid by the top 1%. According to the Washington Post, which, by the way, gave Democrats not one, not two, not three, 4 Pinocchios every time they made these misleading claims. They said 3 of every $4 in the Trump tax cuts didn't go to corporations, but they went to individuals, cutting taxes for the lowest income individuals by 10%, while cutting taxes for the top 1% of the income earners by less than 0.5%. In addition, we saw a record 25-year wage increase for median household incomes. Real wages at the bottom 10% rose 2 times faster than the top 10%. Real wealth at the bottom half of households rose 3 times faster than that of the top half of our country. A record 6 million people were lifted out of poverty. Black, Hispanic, and Asian American citizens experienced historic high incomes and all-time low unemployment. Here's the reality, Mr. Chairman. Our Democrat colleagues oppose the American people's tax cuts back in 2017, and they oppose their tax cuts today. And if they were successful in this endeavor, here's what would happen. We'd have a 22% tax hike on every American citizen, on average. They just suffered through a 21% tax hike from the inflation tax over the last 4 years and the worst cost of living crisis in modern history. Median income families would lose $1,700. 26 million small businesses would pay at the highest marginal rate and lose the 20% deduction, putting them on a comparable level to the corporate tax rates. Child tax credits, 40 million families would have the tax credit for their children cut in half. And 91% of the American people that get the standard deduction would have that cut in half. Those are the results of the Democrats standing in the way of what would be, if they were successful, the highest tax hike in American history. Here's the other false claim. To pay for these tax cuts, the Democrats are going to say that Republicans are cutting benefits for seniors and for, again, our poorest and most vulnerable among us. Here's the truth, Mr. Chairman. Republicans are fighting to right-size a woke, weaponized, and bloated bureaucracy, to root out the trillions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse, and to rein in the reckless spending of the Biden administration and our Democrat colleagues from over the last 4 years. Prior to 2019, before President Biden took office, and he and the Democrats jammed $2 trillion through in the so-called COVID relief, even though maybe 10, 20% of that money actually went for the purposes of COVID relief. Our budget back then was $4.5 trillion. Today, it's $7 trillion. With the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, they gave away $700 billion in tax credits to green energy corporations. They expanded Obamacare subsidies to people making more than $500,000 and already had, many of whom already had employer-sponsored health care. And they expanded the IRS, $80 billion, 80,000 IRS agents, shaking down mostly middle-class people and small businesses. With the stroke of a pen, President Biden wasted $2 trillion unilaterally of taxpayer monies by opening up our welfare services, taxpayer-funded welfare services to people in this country illegally. He waived work requirements for means-tested welfare programs from SNAP to Medicaid and beyond, trapping people in poverty and dependence on the federal government. He mandated expensive and unreliable electric vehicles for all Americans and a whole lot more. In fact, we're spending $9,000 per illegal immigrant in this country for the millions of people who violated our sovereignty and came to this country in violation of our immigration laws. $9,000 of what taxpayers pay for people who are here illegally for taxpayer-funded social services. Mr. Chairman, that's more than we spend on the most vulnerable Americans for Medicaid. That's more than we spend collectively for our veterans for their military retirement. The President Biden, weakened government program integrity, allowing people who aren't eligible for Medicaid and other programs to receive benefits. Case in point, we used to review the Medicaid rolls twice a year to make sure people who were on the rolls were those who were most vulnerable and those who qualified according to the law. That was revoked by the Biden administration. And they only did it once a year. And if you changed it back, you'd eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse and save $160 billion of taxpayer monies. He implemented unconstitutional and regressive student loan bailouts, forcing working Americans to subsidize the upper middle class, law students, medical students. These are folks that deferred their education. These are hardworking people that didn't think they could afford college. We have an unprecedented opportunity, Mr. Chairman, and my fellow Republicans, and we have a sacred obligation at this moment to meet this moment with the urgency it demands. Now more than ever is the time for Republicans in Congress to demonstrate the courage of their convictions and take the bold action in this historic moment. Save this country. Save our children's future. Save us from wrecking the greatest economy in the world, for jeopardizing our national security and our leadership in the world. The world is counting on a safe, strong, and free America. And I believe that this bill encapsulates the policies that are going to restore America's greatness. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield. And I reserve the remainder of my time.